For 6 long years, Fritz Haarmann walked freely through the streets of Hanover, not as a fugitive, but as a trusted police informant. He smiled at officers, shared drinks with locals, even offered help in investigations. No one suspected the monster hiding beneath the polite exterior. Behind closed doors, however, Haarmann was feeding a darkness so grotesque it would stain the city's history forever. At least 24 young lives were stolen.
Hello viewers, today we dive into one of the most disturbing chapters in Germany's dark history, a story of trust betrayed and innocence destroyed. For 6 years, a man walked among the people of Hanover, shaking hands, exchanging smiles, even working alongside the police. But behind his friendly facade was a predator, a monster, a shadow that fed on the vulnerable. This is the chilling story of Fritz Haarmann, the man they would come to call the Vampire of Hanover. Without further delay, let's begin unraveling this disturbing story.
In the 1920s, Fritz Haarmann was a familiar face on the bustling streets of Hanover, a charming, well-dressed man who sold second-hand clothes and always seemed to have fresh, affordable meat for the neighborhood housewives. They adored him, trusted him, never suspecting that both his goods and his meat came from the same horrific source. The truth would shatter the city, for Haarmann's supplies were taken from the bodies of murdered runaway boys.
The people of Hanover saw Fritz as an odd, eccentric man, a little strange perhaps, but friendly enough, and certainly harmless. He was a familiar figure, one who always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. Even the police liked him, trusting him enough to use him as an informant. But behind that disarming smile and helpful demeanor, Fritz was hiding a dark secret, a secret that allowed him to carry out a nightmarish killing spree right under the noses of those who thought they knew him. Once his crimes came to light, Fritz Haarmann's name became forever etched in infamy. The world knew him as the Vampire of Hanover, a predator who ended lives with a chilling love bite that pierced straight through the windpipe. Others called him the Butcher of Hanover, a title that spoke to the sheer brutality of his acts. In the end, he confessed to nearly 30 murders, yet police believed the real number was far higher, hidden among the shadows of the city he once called home.
Fritz Haarmann was born on October 25, 1879, to a gloomy father nicknamed Sulky Allah and a sickly mother who cared for him deeply. He was the youngest of 6 children and preferred playing with dolls, wearing dresses, and staying away from other kids, especially boys. His father thought he needed to toughen up, so at 16, Fritz was sent to a military school in Breisach. At first, he enjoyed it there, but just a few months later, he was diagnosed with epilepsy. This ended his time at the school and became the first big turn in a life that would later grow very dark. After being forced to leave school because of his epilepsy, Fritz spent a year working in his father's cigar factory. But instead of finding direction, his life took a disturbing turn. He committed his first crime, targeting young boys in a way that shocked everyone who knew him. The police caught him, and he was sent to a mental asylum. For 6 long months, Fritz lived behind its cold, locked doors. But he wasn't cured, and he wasn't ready to change. One night, he slipped away, escaping the asylum's walls and disappearing across the border into Switzerland, leaving behind the first chilling signs of the darkness that was yet to come.
While in Switzerland, Fritz met a young woman named Erna Lord, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he might settle into a normal life. They even became engaged. But when Erna became pregnant, everything changed. The engagement fell apart, and Fritz left her behind, returning to Germany in 1900 to begin his mandatory military service. His time in the army was short-lived. Plagued by epilepsy and signs of deep mental instability, he spent 4 months in a military hospital before being discharged in 1902. After that, his father, convinced Fritz was dangerous, tried several times to have him locked away in the asylum for good. But each time, Fritz slipped through the cracks, managing to stay free and on a path that would lead to far darker deeds. After leaving the military, Fritz Haarmann survived on his small pension, which grew in 1904 when he was officially declared disabled. Over the next 10 years, he added to his income through petty crimes, burglaries, and various cons.
But the real danger for the teenage boys of Hanover began after World War I. Haarmann's crimes escalated, growing darker, more violent, and terrifyingly calculated. By 1913, the police had grown tired of Haarmann's constant criminal antics and finally caught him for good. Convicted of burglarizing a Hanover warehouse, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a twist of fate that kept him out of World War I. While behind bars, Haarmann met 24-year-old pimp Hans Granz, and the two quickly fell in love. After their release, they moved in together, forging a partnership that would last years.
Paroled in 1918, as the German Empire crumbled around him, Haarmann immediately threw himself into two paths, one with a gang of smugglers, the other as a police informant in Hanover, a role that would give him access, trust, and the perfect cover for the dark crimes that were soon to follow. In September 1918, 17-year-old Friedel Roa ran away from home, vanishing into the shadowy backstreets of Hanover. When his father searched for him, he discovered that Friedel had been spending time with Fritz Haarmann, who often invited young boys to his apartment under the guise of harmless fun, an invitation that would soon turn sinister. Yet when Rohi's father brought this information to the authorities, the police were hesitant to act against their most valuable informant. He persisted, and eventually they agreed to check on Haarmann. They found him in bed with a 13-year-old boy, but there was no sign of Friedel Rohi. Under the laws of the time, all they could do was arrest Haarmann for indecency with a minor. Haarmann later coldly noted that the police hadn't searched thoroughly enough. Friedel Rohi's severed head had been hidden behind the stove the entire time. Fritz Haarmann had already gained a reputation as a black market butcher, known for his friendly demeanor and irresistibly cheap meat. By 1919, Germany was in severe economic turmoil, and many families struggled just to put food on the table. During the early 1920s, Haarmann spent much of his time loitering around Hanover's train station, searching for teenage boys to lure home with promises of food and comfort. With thousands of children running away from their families due to post-war hardships, he had no shortage of potential victims. After luring and feeding his victims, Haarmann would kill them with a gruesome love bite, biting through their windpipes. He then sexually abused their bodies and dismembered them, horrifyingly turning some into sausage or cutlets that he sold as beef or pork. Once the grisly work was done, he disposed of the remains in the nearby River Line. For 6 years, while the police looked the other way, their favorite informant, Fritz Haarmann, is believed to have killed over 50 boys, often chosen by Granz out of jealousy over some article of clothing. He profited from selling both their clothes and, horrifyingly, their flesh, even as desperate parents flooded the streets of Hanover searching for their missing children, haunted by the terror of the Vampire of Hanover. In May 1924, the police could no longer ignore Fritz Haarmann after children discovered a skull on the banks of the River Line. As more skulls and skeletons surfaced, the river was dragged, revealing the bodies of at least 22 teenage boys and young men. Panic gripped Hanover, and suspicion quickly fell on Haarmann, known for luring runaway boys to his apartment. Because local police were considered too close to him, 2 detectives from Berlin were brought in to take over the investigation. The Berlin detectives soon caught Haarmann lurking in a shadowy corner of the train station, assaulting a teenager. He was immediately jailed while the detectives conducted a thorough search of his apartment. Inside, they were met with a nightmarish scene. Walls and floors soaked in blood, and over 100 pieces of clothing belonging to his victims scattered throughout. While in custody, the Vampire of Hanover readily confessed to his crimes. When asked how many boys he had killed, he casually replied, 30 or 40, I don't know. Later, he estimated that the true number was likely between 50 and 70. Despite his admissions, police were only able to identify 27 of his victims, leaving dozens unaccounted for. Haarmann was charged with multiple counts of murder, and a trial date was promptly scheduled.
In May 1924, the police could no longer ignore Fritz Haarmann after children discovered a skull on the banks of the River Line. As more skulls and skeletons surfaced, the river was dragged, revealing the bodies of at least 22 teenage boys and young men. Panic gripped Hanover, and suspicion quickly fell on Haarmann, known for luring runaway boys to his apartment. Because local police were considered too close to him, 2 detectives from Berlin were brought in to take over the investigation.
After his execution, Fritz Haarmann's head was preserved in formaldehyde and sent to the medical school in Göttingen. In 1925, the remains of his victims, recovered from the River Line, were laid to rest in a mass grave at Stockener Cemetery. Though Hanover sought to move on from the horror of his crimes, Haarmann's legacy lived on in popular culture, inspiring German expressionist filmmaker Fritz Lang's 1931 classic thriller M, in which both police and criminals hunt a serial killer who preys on children. Fritz Haarmann and Hans Grön's horrific crimes had consequences that went beyond their immediate victims. Although homosexuality was illegal in Germany at the time, it had been somewhat tolerated, but the shocking stories of Haarmann's sexual violence and Grön's cruelty sparked a wave of homophobia across the country. As public fear and disgust grew, the stage was set for the later Nazi campaigns of persecution and murder against homosexuals. Hans Grön's, however, lived to an old age, dying in Hanover in 1975. Decades later, in 2015, the medical school in Göttingen finally cremated Fritz Haarmann's preserved head, erasing the last tangible trace of the Butcher of Hanover.
Viewers, this was the chilling story of Fritz Haarmann, the vampire of Hanover, whose crime shook a city, scarred a nation, and left a legacy of horror that still echoes through history. What are your thoughts on this chilling story? Share your opinions in the comments below. We'd love to know how you feel about these shocking events. If this chilling story gripped you, like, share, and subscribe for more true crime cases that peel back the darkest layers of history. And remember, if you or someone you know is struggling with heavy thoughts, reach out to a mental health professional. Your life and well-being are far more important than any story we cover here. Take care, and until next time, another haunting case awaits.